Hello.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Angus. Hello, Angus Donald. Welcome to what is now going to be called Books and Booze, or as Stephen Mackay said, we should call it Books and Boobs. But I don't know whether he was referring to us specifically. But no, Books and Booze. And this is the booze I'm drinking. Maggie's Leap, which is an upstream Irish beer. So Irish, because of course it is St. Patrick's Day. So happy St. Patrick's Day.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
What are you drinking?
I have a large gin and tonic here, which is my favourite tipple. Ice and lemon, as always.
Very nice.
I have most nights. So,
good. Cheers. Well, cheers. Yeah, cheers. Cheers to you, and cheers to everybody that's joining in. I can see people joining in.
Good, very good. Very glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me, Matthew.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since we've met in person. It's been a couple of years ago, before the crazy times that were COVID. Was it maybe 3 years ago? I don't know, when we were in Wrexham.
Wrexham, wasn't it? Yeah, we had a gig in Wrexham for the
must have been 2019.
That's what it's called. Yeah. That's right. Actually, I rather like that one. I've been there twice now, but I was very disappointed because the audience judged our books and who had the best. What was the competition? And you won.
Yeah, it was the best era. It was like who had the best era.
That's it. Yeah. And you absolutely trumped it. I remember your speech. You got up and you were full of energy. You were absolutely bursting with energy and said, perhaps you said the Dark Ages because you had Tolkien and you had Game of Thrones and you had Harry Potter or something like that. And that's why it's the best era. And it was absolutely brilliant. You were kind of like fizzing with energy. And I got up and gave a languid speech about, 12th century Renaissance and poetry and shit. And you go, no. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. And it was brilliant. And you won over the audience. And I remember very well.
Well, I should go into politics maybe, but instead, yes, I'm a writer. So there you go. So in another life, talking about writing, as we are, let's get straight to it with some questions. And what started you writing in the first place? So I know you were a journalist. So how was the transition from journalist to author? Did you always want to write historical fiction? What's the background?
I was in Bali, and about early 20s, and I was doing research as an anthropologist on magic and witchcraft in a traditional Balinese village in the late 80s. And I was quite lonely, and I was sitting on the balcony of my very crappy little house. There was no electricity in the village. There was nobody who spoke English, and I would sort of wander around and go to a festival and not really understand what was going on. And I was quite sort of bored and lonely. So I had acres of time, and I started writing a novel in a notebook on the balcony, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I thought, and that was my Damascene conversion. I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. And I was about 23. And then I thought, well, how on earth do you go about getting there? How do you go about achieving that? So I thought, well, journalists get paid to write. So when I found myself a couple of years later in Hong Kong, I did a lot of traveling when I was younger. And I found myself in Hong Kong, and I got a job on a magazine as a proofreader, which they just needed people who could read English to a reasonable level and weren't idiots. And I got that, and then I started editing, and then I wrote a few little stories for them, and I spent 5 years basically working my way up to working for a newspaper. And then when I came back to Britain, I started working for newspapers then, and then they sent me abroad again. But it wasn't until I was in my late 30s, I came back I did a brief stint in Afghanistan as a war correspondent, covering the war in Jalalabad. We were looking for Osama bin Laden, and
Wow.
terrifying. And I wasn't making any money because I was too kind of amped up and full of adrenaline to write. And I kept blowing up my laptops. I was so full of energy, and every time I touched the keyboard, there was something going on. It just went, and I did it twice in a row. I came
Wow.
to report by candlelight, just dictating stories off the top of my head down the phone to the independent newspaper and various other people I was working for. But I came back and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was coming up at 40, and I was thinking, shit, I've got to get on with this. So I took a job at the Times newspaper on a woman's section. Very soft, easy job. Nobody was shooting at me, which was one of the big highlights of it as far as I was concerned. And I sort of started writing in my spare time. And I thought, I've got to do this a particular way so I can make sure that it works. So I started writing like Bernard Cornwell, who's one of my big heroes. And I wanted commercial fiction, history, because I love history. I've always loved history. And commercial fiction in the style of Bernard Cornwell. And I wrote my first book. It took me 6 years to get it together. And then once I got serious about it, I got a deal very quickly. I sent out the first 3 chapters to an agent and to a whole bunch of agents. And I got someone back within a week. And I got a deal within a month for 2 books, which paid me, the advance was twice it was 2 years' salary at the Times. So that was it. I was able to quit my job and start. And that was the beginning of the Outlaw Chronicles, which ended up being 10 novels in the end.
Anyway, that's really interesting. So
Matthew,
sorry?
How did you get started?
Well, I want to ask you a follow-up question to that actually first. Because you said so you got this big advance, and so or I can sort of follow up and answer at the same time, because when I got into writing by originally self-publishing, so our roots were very different in that, but there were similarities. So I sort of wanted to get into doing something creative. I ended up writing technical manuals. So I was a writer of something that wasn't really interesting at all. But I learned a lot about computing. I ended up doing a degree in computing and got a job as a technical writer and moving in that way. So I learned all about the sort of technical side of producing documents and proofreading and editing and creating PDFs and all that sort of stuff. So that was useful, I think, later on. And then when I did get an agent, but when I couldn't get a book deal, my agent was basically like, well, that's it then, throw those books away and let's move on to the next thing. And he was probably thinking, I'll move on to the next writer, you're rubbish, not managed to sell a book. And I said, well, hang on a minute, I've just spent the last how many years writing these things. I'm not going to just throw them away, this is crazy. So I decided I'd self-publish, and so I came at it that way, and I self-published the first 2 in 2015. The first one came out and the second one 2016, very early 2016. And because I sent you the manuscript of the first one, and The Serpent's Sword, and I got, I was really over the moon, that you said you'd read it, and then you did read it, and you gave me a lovely quote, and which has graced many of the covers of my books.
Well, it stood out, The Serpent's Sword. It stood out from, I get sent a lot of books, as I'm sure you do now as well, but it stood out from a lot of the other stuff I was reading. I just thought, this is first class stuff. This is as good as I'm doing, as good as Bernard Cornwell, as good as anyone in the field. So
you can't ask for more than that. So that was it. So I think from that moment,
it doesn't get better than this, I think, was the quote.
That was pretty much the quote. And it was a great thing. So I'm always appreciative, and I know we've met a couple of times in person, and I'm still paying off my dues by buying you beers, every time we meet.
Hopefully that continue.
Or gin and tonics next time.
My screen has frozen. Is yours still working okay? Just checking.
Mine's still working. I can still see you. Can you see me? Good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're frozen. I think that might be my crappy connection. But as long as you can see me, that's fine, I guess.
I can still see you moving around. I can still hear you as well. So hopefully it will catch up. Yeah. I can see you. You've not frozen at all. So fingers crossed it will carry on.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
So I was going to say though. So you started in. I think the first one was published 2009. Your first one.
Yes, it was. Yeah, I wrote it in 2008. I quit my job at the Times in 2008, and it came out in the summer, I think, of 2009. And then I
So
wrote one a year. In those days, I could get by writing one a year.
So this is my question. My question really was, how have things changed since then? Because you said you got a substantial advance, which
Yeah,
allowed you to give up the day job and to work full time as a writer. So my transition was, I had to still write full time for a few years. I wrote, I think, 4 or 5 novels while still working full time. Then I worked part
wow,
time. Then I think I'm not sure which one now, but by the time I'd written like 6, I think I was working like 3 days a week and 2 days writing,
yeah,
and then I got made redundant, so I was able then to I had to sort of take the plunge to being a full time writer in 2018,
yeah.
and I've not
Okay.
looked back, and I'm happy with that. But I think your the way that your career has gone was different. So it started off in the halcyon days of big advances. So
Yes, I mean it was the tail end of that halcyon period. I mean, in those days, writers were treated well. They were indulged by publishers. They were nurtured. You could, if one didn't go particularly well, they'd give you another chance. You could write another one, and they would fund you while you wrote. And it's completely different now, I think. And the biggest thing that's changed is the internet, of course.
yeah,
Because when I started in 2008, there were no such thing as ebooks, or if they were very, very small part of the market. And now, the majority of the books I sell are electronic, so it's about two to one electronic to paper for my sales at the moment. And that revolution of the internet, allowing everybody to self-publish and not being basically getting rid of the idea of gatekeepers, which were the agents and the publishers, allowed everybody to publish. And I remember talking to my agent, and he said, "You realize that there are 400,000 novels being published every year in the UK?" And I thought, 400,000, and it had been something like 20,000. And
yeah,
suddenly, this tidal wave of books that were quite a lot of them in historical fiction. There was also, I have to add this, that there was a boom in historical fiction at the second, in from between about 2006 to 2012, when they were doing really well. Hilary Mantel was
yeah,
winning prizes. Historical fiction was the thing; it was the fad. Everybody was doing it. And I remember talking to Robin Young, who's a friend of mine who wrote some very good books. And she said rather mournfully, when I started out in historical fiction, it was me, Con Eagleton, Bernard Cornwell, and Chris Sampson, who wrote C.J. Sampson. And there were only 5 of us. And we had the whole market, and Hilary Mantel, we had the whole
yeah.
historical fiction market sewn up. And now there are thousands of people in the same market. So that's one of the main ways that it's changed. But it, you know, it's good. It's good that more people are writing and reading historical fiction, because it increases the interest in history, and so that, I think, is a good, even if it means that there's a smaller slice of the pie for the number of people who are in it, who are in the genre.
Yeah. So yes, that's interesting. So I suppose one of the things that doesn't change really is how you actually go about writing a novel. And one of the things I always ask my guests on here is about their process, and what's a typical writing day for you, and how do you get the words down, and how many books do you write a year, and all that sort of stuff.
I do. I used to just do one a year, but that was not sustainable in terms of income. And I'm now writing 2 a year, or almost 2 a year. And basically, I get up in the morning and I come out to my office, which is in the garden, and it's a separate building. It used to be a summer house, and I converted it, or someone converted it for me. And I sit there from about 9:30 in the morning until lunchtime, and I do most of my writing then. And then I go and have some lunch, and in the afternoon I do other things, like sometimes go for a walk, or go to the gym, or have a nap, or do some reading. and then I come back in the evening between about 5 and 7 for another bit, and I usually go over the stuff that I've written that morning in that sort of second period, and sort of realise how awful it is and try and fix it and make it slightly readable. And then I do the same the next day. And I work 5 days a week. I have 2 small children, so I keep weekends free for family stuff, and things like rugby, which I like to watch. And
sounds remarkably similar to my own. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but now I've got an office out. So where I am now is my writing room, which is a converted garage. So I'm like you. I'm out in the garden, just got to walk out in the rain, across to
you need to get the house, I think, because otherwise other stuff gets in the way. Like the postman comes.
Absolutely, gosh,
it's away.
The number of interruptions that you get when you're actually in the house, even just being physically, literally like 5 meters, that way or whatever in my house. In the day, it's like the phone calls going, the people coming to the front door, neighbors, you're making a racket, whatever, just things happening, especially people coming out during lockdown as well, when everyone's been around. It's been the whole family in the house as well. That's why I ended up doing the conversion, because it was like I need some space to myself.
Lockdown was great though for me. I mean, I really liked it. I mean, a lot of people had a tough time, and it was awful for many people. But for me, all the reasons that I had for going up to London or going out to see people or doing that, I couldn't do any of that sort of stuff. I'd go for a walk every day and then write for the rest of the time. And I think I got nearly 3 novels done last year.
Wow.
2 self-published and one Viking one. So to be honest, it was actually extremely productive. I mean, I wouldn't want to do it all the time. But,
yeah, I struggle. I struggle without I think without the stimulus of meeting other people and just having stuff going on. After a while, I started just thinking, I don't know what else to write about. And I recognized when I was writing, things were cropping up in my writing that were things either I'd done before or things I'd watched on TV. I was like not stealing, things coming out of my mind. I'm thinking, hang on a minute, I saw that in a police drama that I was watching on TV or something, and everything just there was nothing more coming into my head. I needed to get out. I want to go out and meet people.
That's quite right. You do need to, I mean, I used to do a lot more traveling. I mean, I haven't been anywhere for 2 years, but I used to do more research and go. I mean, I wrote a book about the Battle of the Boyne, which was really interesting. And I went to Ireland and walked the battlefield and went to the museum there. And that was a little 2-day jaunt, which was kind of for work, and that so I could excuse myself doing it. But it was very good. It was great just to sort of get the vistas and walk the actual ground of a battlefield, which is brilliant. And I missed doing that. In lockdown. I had the same experience as you, where you find your well running dry, your creative well running dry. You do need to go and interact and meet people and see things and have ideas and sit around.
But anyway, I'm like you. I can't complain too much about lockdown. I still managed to do the day job, and actually, I did manage to write a couple of novels, and the whole world was buying books for escapism, which is the kind of books that we write. So
that was we had a small uptick in sales over that year, which was very, very useful. So
certainly can't complain too much. So I just noticed, look, I bring up a comment here. Look, a certain Giles Christian, I don't know who he is, but came in and said, says great to see you, and saying it's about a crowded market. Well, I don't know. He's crowded it. He's crowding that market, I think.
I heard Giles on Twitter the other day saying he's now going to be coming back to writing Viking books, which is very exciting.
Well, that's interesting. So that brings me on to the thing. So Giles was writing Viking books before me, and obviously before you as well. I started writing Saxon books because I thought everyone's writing Vikings. After a while, I've started to write now a series of books with Vikings in, very early Viking age, but still Vikings. You started writing Vikings now. Giles moved away. Now he's coming back. Is everybody ultimately going to write Viking novels? And will Hilary Mantel eventually write a Viking novel?
Well, she must. She has to. I'll have a word.
Yeah.
No, I think there is a big Viking renaissance, and it's driven by the TV. Unfortunately, it's the series. Well, you had the Last Kingdom, which is Bernard Cornwell's Saxon thing, which has been very successful. There's a new season out just now, and then you had Vikings, which is about Loth. I forgot his name.
Ragnar Lothbrok.
Yeah, Ragnar Heritraus, and that was very good. And now they've got something called Vikings Valhalla. So the TV is fueling it, and there seems to be something of a sort of Viking renaissance with lots of people doing it. Plus, there's also the Marvel movies with Thor and Loki.
Oh, and the computer game Assassin's Creed.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So it seems to be one of those hot topics at the moment. Hopefully, it'll be reflected in book sales.
Yeah.
Well TV.
What do you think the next hot topic will be? Or a better question would be: are you willing to say where you're going next historically after the Vikings?
I shall answer them. Yeah, I'm doing Mongols next. I've got a really good Mongol story which I'm going to do as a trilogy, and I've started writing that a few weeks ago. I've had to stop to go back to finish the edits on Bjarki and Tor, the Berserker series, the Fireborn series, and that's the third one of those is coming out in August. And then I'll finish that, and then I'm going to write one Mongol one, and then I'm going to go back and do another 3 Vikings. So I'm going to be writing Mongols and Vikings alternately for the next 2 or 3 years. That's the plan. So I'm hoping Mongols is going to be the next big thing. It made sense to me because it's quite it's medieval, but it's different medieval, and I'm it's in the 13th century, so it's kind of like, there's knights and there's also Mongols on horseback, and there's the whole sort of Asian thing, which I'm hoping will make it attractive to publishers who want to sell to the Chinese market. So there's a slightly cynical, but also I'm fascinated with their culture. I was born in China, and I spent a lot of my early years in Asia, in China and in Hong Kong for 5 years, and in India for a couple of years, and Indonesia, and so I've got a sort of Asian soul. Half of my soul is Asian, the other half's English. So I kind of East meets West sort of thing.
That sounds great. It also makes me think of your fantasy novel that came out. Was it Gates of Stone?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yeah.
And tell us a bit about that. And I've got a question about that. But tell us first about how that came to be and why you decided to write a fantasy novel, and what the process was like.
Well, I kind of thought I'd have a go because I think historical fiction can be quite similar to fantasy. I mean, if a fantasy book's done well and it's a believable universe, you have to do that. You have to create this universe, and you have to have believable people with motives that the reader will understand, and a structure and rules, and things that govern that world. And fantasy is pretty much the same. You're setting up historical fiction is very much the same. You're setting up rules, or perhaps it's religion or whatever it is that you're doing, and the characters have to abide by the rules. For example, if you're writing about the Crusades, the attitudes towards non-Christian peoples, and violence done by holy people. So I think that they are sort of brother genres or sister genres. So I thought I'd have a crack at Gates of Stone, and I wanted to write something Asian because I love Asia, and I never get to go there these days, but I do love it, and I wish I could go and visit it more often. And this is set in an imagined 18th century Indonesia with a sort of pirate society, a little bit of magic, a Russian sort of Tsarina who is dispossessed in her own. It's not called Russia; it's called something else. But she's kind of Russian, and she's trying to get the money together to go back and retake the throne of the ice bearer in Russia. And she goes to in the Indonesian sort of place because there's something very valuable there. It's a drug that is only produced there. It's sort of based on the spice markets. And yeah, it was. I think it's some of the best thing I've written. It's called Gates of Stone. It's one of the best ones I've written. Nobody ever bought it.
So
I bought it. I used a different name. I called myself Angus McCallan because I wanted to separate Angus Donald and the historical fiction from Angus McCallan and the fantasy, and it just didn't work at all. Nobody bought it, and I'm afraid that died a death. Though
so that's the question I had for you. Really, was I know that you wrote this under you brought it out under this pseudonym Angus McCallan. And I remember speaking to you at the time. I remember when we were in Wrexham, we were talking about it then, and I said to you, I thought that was a mistake, and that it would have been better to use the name that you'd spent all these years building up a brand, for, and you had a readership, around. And interestingly enough, you see at the moment, Giles Christian has brought out his first modern day thriller.
Yes.
And he's using his the same name, and Bernard Cornwell has done that before. He's written modern thrillers and there are lots of historical fiction, and he's always written under the same name. So, do you think it was a mistake to use a pseudonym?
Yes, I do actually. I should have. I would have. It would have been better if I'd used Angus Donald, but the logic was that I should have called myself Angus P. Donald or something like that.
Yeah,
separated a bit like who's that guy? There's a guy who's a science fiction writer who also writes contemporary novels. He's dead now. He wrote The Wasp Factory. I can't remember his name.
Ian Banks.
Yes, Ian Banks and Ian M. Banks. And I should have done something like that. But it just I thought that it would be okay, and that I'd get enough support from the publisher to start this new brand, and it just didn't work at all.
So what's the option? Is there an option for buying back the rights and re-releasing it under your own name?
I don't know.
There you go. I'll throw that seed there for you.
I thought about that, and I'd like to do it, but they paid me a lot of money for that one book, so they will probably want to. They'll probably want to hang on to it and get as much income as they can. It was published in 2019, so
maybe they could bring it out under your name, republish it under your own name, and see if that would help. But anyway, it's a pity. It's a pity that you spent all this time writing a book that you were very happy with and pleased with, and that didn't do well.
Well, and what's really sad is that people still say, "Well, when's number 2 coming out?" And the answer is, it isn't, because I can't afford to spend 6 months or a year writing something that doesn't make any money, because the business is about paying the mortgage and putting food on the table, and it's not a hobby.
Have you seen Brandon Sanderson? Have you seen about him recently? He's done this Kickstarter for 3 novels that he's written, and he's raised more than £20 million or something. Honestly, the most ridiculous fantasy novelist.
Oh my god!
Absolutely ridiculous. I can't remember. The numbers are ridiculous. I mean, crazy.
If someone was to pay me $20 million, I'll write whatever you like. So if anybody's listening and they've got a spare $20 million.
Well, I don't think it's one person. I think there's like thousands of people. But he did this Kickstarter.
That would be terrific. I tried doing a Kickstarter thing, and I was trying to raise, I think it was £10,000, and I got about 7. But I pitched it too high. I thought I could make 10, and actually I only got to 7, and then so it didn't work. And then nobody, how these things work. If you don't hit your target,
So I've just opened up his Brandon Sanderson's Kickstarter. There's still 14 days to go if you'd like to contribute. I don't know why I'm publicizing this for him. He's so far got his goal was £760,000. So he obviously reckons that he's worth £1 million for 4 novels. So there's 4 novels, and he's actually raised £22,600,000. That's pounds, not dollars. And it's got 14 days to go. So
okay, right.
That's 4 novels.
I shall start being nice to him online.
Yeah, we've all got to be friends with Brandon Sanderson.
Send him one of my books and see if I can get a quote for it.
Yeah, let's see if let's get him a quote. Yeah. So on that note, we can all wish every writer here, you know, Giles, Christian who's listening in, anyone else, they can all wish they were Brandon Sanderson for a little while.
I'm sure
But
Giles got 20 million for his last one.
yeah, he probably got 22 million. Yeah, he's so we've got some questions here popping in. So I'm going to start looking through them. So this one here from Gary Bowl or Boal, I don't know how to pronounce the surname. Matthew mentioned sending you a book, Angus. Did you know each other at the time, or what are your thoughts on aspiring writers sending you a copy of their books? Do you get a bit fed up with it?
Ooh, that's a difficult one. I didn't know Matthew. That's how we met. He sent me a book, and I must have had a spare moment to read it because I read it and I gave him a good quote. But I do get a lot of people asking me to read their books, and I now almost always say no. Not, I feel mean doing that, but I just don't have the time. I have quite a lot of, I've got a young family, and I've got, 2 books a year to write and all the research to do, and it takes me about 2 months to read something, and I tend to read at night and fall asleep. So please don't send me your books, because I probably won't be able to read them, and then it makes people upset, and I feel bad, and it creates a bad thing. But I tell you what I do, and this is a sideline, is that if you want to, because it takes up a lot of my time, I charge people. So I've got a couple of people that I've been mentoring, and I read their stuff, and we then have a Zoom conversation, and we discuss it, and we talk about the structure of the book and characters. And
is that through the History Quill thing?
I started with them. I've got some of my own people.
Okay.
I started with them, and then they cut my fee. So
because I did some of that. Yeah, I did some of that with them as well. So I had a couple of guys that I mentored for a few months during lockdown.
Yeah.
And it's
I mean, I've got one. I've got a very good guy who is really talented, and I really enjoy it actually. And we have a session once a month, and there's another bloke I've been working with as well. But again, that takes up pretty much a whole day, because I've got to read what he's saying and then think about it, and then we have our conversation, and then I send him a follow-up email. So it's basically a day's work.
Yeah, I found that as well. I found it quite productive, but it's time-consuming as well. I backed out of it after a while when the 2 guys that I was mentoring both sort of went there. They said we spent enough money and we're going to do the book. We're going to publish the books now, whatever. I just decided to call it a day then, but. It was good. I'm still talking to both of them online. We still chat via Twitter and sometimes have phone conversations or Zoom conversations with them, just as a because you get to know these people and
become friends.
Yeah. So Alistair Tosh was one of the guys, and he's just brought out his first historical fiction novel called Siege. It's published by Sharp Books, I think, and the other guy is a Canadian guy called Robin Izzard, but he hasn't published yet. But I think he's going to. Probably self-publish or publish through one of these online publishers soon enough.
Well, I was going to ask you, Matthew, about your experience with self-publishing. Do you think it's something that aspiring writers should aim for, or do you think they should try to go through the traditional route with agents and publishers and all that sort of stuff? What would your advice to aspiring writers be about self-publishing?
I think it probably very much depends on the writer and what other skills that they have. So I think writers that are online extroverts and who can produce lots of marketing content. Oh, cheers! And who what do you got? Speckled hen, is it? Old speckled hen. Oh, nice. You can tell a seasoned drinker who can recognize the can from a brief glimpse on the Zoom call.
It's a very nice little ale there.
Not that I'm always drinking or anything.
No. Can you drink and write?
No,
I can't either. I can't. I tried at the beginning and it just didn't work. I can't type.
It's a prize at the end of a long working day or a working week. But going back to the self-publishing thing. So I think it just really depends on the individual. So in my case, I had lots of the skills that were needed to put together. So I did the typesetting, I did lots of the, I did the cover, I put together everything. And so I wasn't, it was a lot of work, but it didn't put me off doing it. And so all of the online stuff, I did my own website. My basic thing when I started was, I didn't know how many books I was going to sell, if I was going to sell any at all. So I thought, I'm not going to actually spend any money at all on the writing thing. So lots of people will go and they'll pay someone to do the editing and all of this stuff, and you should, if you're going to self-publish, really you should pay an editor and you should pay a cover designer, unless you can do it yourself. But I decided I'm going to do it all myself, and I was able to do that and do it to a good standard. My dad helped edit the first novel. I just did it, kept it all in house, didn't spend any money, and the book did well. But I think some people just want to write, and they're no good at the marketing, and they're no good at the technical side of things, and they wouldn't know where to start. So you've got both sides of things, and I think there's probably somewhere in the middle where you've got this sort of assisted publishing, where maybe you pay someone some money and they put together the cover and they help you put the book out there, and then you do most of it yourself. But I find that a little bit annoying. The people that charge thousands of pounds for people just to sort of stick a cover on it and kind of typeset it and then say, we've put it online and therefore, we'll now, you need to pay us thousands of pounds. I find that a bit offensive. But I think
one of the things that people don't get about professional novelists like us are that actually it's not an easy life. It's a lot of hours, a lot of typing, and a lot of hard work, marketing, and doing all that kind of stuff. And there isn't a lot of spare time. I thought, actually, when I got into it, I thought how wonderful, it'll be a lovely leisurely life of swanning around, going to literary events and having long lunches. And actually, there's a lot of typing. As I was saying, I do 2 books a year, and I think you do more, Matthew, don't you?
Yeah, I'm probably about the same as you. I'm probably about the same as you now. I'm doing about 3. I think I do 3 in 2 years now is my sort of new thing. I was doing 2 a year for a while, but it was just getting too much.
Yeah, it does get too much. But it's just an enormous amount of typing, let alone thinking and editing and coming up with interesting use of language. Just the actual hours of typing is quite. I write 100,000 words, roughly 100,000 words per book. So 2 years, 200,000, with all the changes and rewrites. That's about 250,000 words typed a year. Not counting emails or
all the rest of it. Yeah.
So that's a lot of words to actually type, let alone the artistic contribution and the ideas and the research and all that kind of thing.
So look, this brings talking about time and how much time things take. There's a question here from Rachel: how much time is spent on research before writing a book?
That's quite difficult to answer, because, for example, this Mongol one that I'm just starting, I had the idea about a year ago, and I started reading some books, some really good, interesting books on Mongols. And I was going to show you one of them, but basically, I started reading it on the side, and then coming up with the idea, and then coming up with ideas, and so basically, I've been researching it for a year, but only kind of 3 hours a week. So that's difficult to say. And then when I finished the first draft of the Loki Sword, which is the 3rd Berserker one, I thought, right, let's get going on this. And I spent about a month while the book was being edited by my publisher, looking at all sorts of things, and I still didn't get all the research I wanted done in that month. So I just started writing, and I will be doing writing and research at the same time as this book comes together. So it's very difficult to say how much time do you spend researching, 1 month or 1 year or whatever, because it's actually
very interesting.
Ongoing process.
And again, that really that echoes my own experience with the latest couple of books I've written. The one I'm sort of editing now, Forest of Foes, which is the 9th book in the Bearbrand ones.
9th.
He's got the 9th. Yeah, they've gone to France And I just thought, it'd be fine, whatever, another book. And then you suddenly start researching and think, oh my God, I know nothing about French history and the Merovingian kings and all this stuff. And so I spent, and it was the same really with A Night of Flames, which is the Hunlaf, the second one, which has just come out. And that one, they've gone to Norway. And again, I thought, oh, Norway, it's all just Dark Ages stuff. But you start researching all the kings and all the, what's going on. And
none of this
so
without the internet, don't you? I mean, this is, I was saying earlier on, the internet has changed the game completely, allowing a lot of people to write more books. But it also means that I can go on Google Earth or look at maps or, call stuff up. The entire knowledge of humankind is pretty much available from my little shed in the office. And that is great. I've written lots of books spanning all over the world, and I could not possibly have done it 20 years ago, because I would have had to go to libraries and I'd have had to make notes. It would have just taken a hell of a lot longer. I mean, now if I think, how far is it from X to Y, and how long would it take a guy on a horse to ride that distance, I can find that in a matter of moments. Whereas you might have to go and pore over a map. Before the internet, you have to pore over a map and use a bit of string, and then
it's amazing. I mean, it was definitely a lot more difficult to find that information in the past. And I've mentioned in other chats before, I met as a teenager when I was studying English at A level. I met Rosemary Sutcliffe, who was friends with my English teacher, and it was just a couple of years before she died. And she was wheelchair bound from an early age, from her teens. And she died at quite an old age, and she wrote all of these amazing historical fiction novels about big burly blokes riding horses and fighting and doing all this stuff, and she couldn't do any of it. And it was amazing for me that not only did she get all that research and did all that from her house or going to libraries or whatever, but all this imagination about what it was like to live these lives in the past that was so different from her own experience was fantastic. It was very inspiring later on, looking back. At the time, as a teenager, I didn't really think any of that. But as an adult now, a writer, looking back, I think how amazing that this very frail woman who was stuck in a wheelchair and obviously very physically disabled was able to get outside of her own world and her own physical experience and create these amazing stories.
Well, that's the lovely thing about fiction and historical fiction in particular, is how that you can take the reader with you into all sorts of different worlds and places and situations that you would never normally experience. I mean, how many people have actually been in a battle?
Exactly. I mean, you were there in Fallujah or whatever, you're getting shot at.
No, I mean, I was sort of hiding behind a but I try not to get shot. But but sort of standing in a shield wall, I've always wondered what that must be like. I kind of tend to rely on memories of rugby at school, because that's about as close as I can imagine it being. Charging into a line of other people and shoving and in a scrum. It's
just using what you've got, those bits, and then just letting your imagination run wild. Really, I think. So some more questions.
Yeah.
Someone, Keith here says, fan of both of your works. Do you guys read much outside of historical fiction? If so, what do you read, and does it influence how you write historical fiction in any way?
Yeah. Yes, I guess so. I read. I've just been reading this really interesting book called Kindred, which is about Neanderthals. And much of what we thought we knew about Neanderthals is wrong, and they were much more sophisticated. That's the sort of thrust of it, and that's fascinating for me. And it's nothing to do with sort of history, but it's kind of not historical fiction. And the woman who's written it is brilliant. And I contacted her and said, "Do you want to write a novel based on your research?" And she said, "Actually, I'm already going to do that, thanks." But it's absolutely brilliant. And so I do read stuff outside of that, but quite often, well, I mean, I'm reading a lot of history. I'm reading the travels of Friar Rubruk, who went to Mongolia in the middle of the 13th century, and he was a monk who had an extraordinary journey, and so I'm reading about his journey all the way into deepest, darkest Mongolia. But not a lot of stuff outside of that. I don't really read literature. I tend to read history books or historical fiction, so I guess not really. What about you, Matthew?
I tend to read. I do read a bit of historical fiction, but books that get sent to me. But normally, I don't go out of my way to buy those sort of books. I mean, when I do read for pleasure, I might read. I read sort of. Well, recently I've been on a bit of a Western binge, so I've been reading some old classic Westerns and some modern Westerns as well.
Louis L'Amour?
So I was reading some Louis L'Amour because obviously, why wouldn't you? The only problem with Louis L'Amour is after you read like 3 or 4, they all sound the same. You start thinking, actually, every single one of these, somehow they're all the same, even though they're all different. It's really quite weird. And
sorry, can I just interrupt you? There's a brilliant quote from Bernard Cornwell about how to make money as a writer. He said, the way to make money as a writer is to write a book called How to Take Care of Your Alsatian, and you put it in the front of a pet store, and if people buy it and it goes well, you take the book back, and you then, in the next one, you cross out the word Alsatian and you write Spaniel, and then you sell that, and then you take it back again, you cross out Spaniel, you write Jack Russell, and so the books are all exactly the same.
Well, the thing is, that the weird thing is that Louis L'Amour, it wasn't exactly like that. So it's not formulaic to the extent that each story is identical, but in the end, there's always there's always the strong sort of silent type, and there's the girl that falls for him and he kills the bad guy. But the setups are all quite different, and different things happen. But in the end, it all just sort of becomes one, and it's always the showdown. And but his writing is really gripping, and I enjoy it. But I've read some modern westerns as well, and when I say modern western, I mean westerns written now but still set in the 19th century. I've been thinking about a western, so you're going Mongol. I'm possibly going to go 19th century.
I have to write a western. I loved when I was a child. I used to read J.T. Edson and Louis L'Amour. J.T. Edson was even more formulaic and a bit moronic, really, but it was great stuff, and I loved it. As a sort of 11-year-old, I absolutely adored him. And then Louis L'Amour as I got older. So I have to write a western before I die.
Well, that's how I feel too, and it's funny because there's so many people that I speak to. I mean, my agent, I haven't got an agent now, but my ex-agent, said, "Well, we shouldn't write a western. These westerns are all old hat. Nobody's going to buy one." And then
my agent said, "Don't write a western."
But then you look at it now and you think, okay, I know it's a cerebral modern look on the Western genre, but things like The Power of the Dog that's out there now, and it's nominated for 12 Oscars, and you're thinking, come on, why not write a Western? I mean, so that's it. I'm pretty much convinced now.
Louis L'Amour wrote kind of ebooks really before the internet age, because they're all slim. They're all about 60,000, 70,000 words, no more than that, and they are a bit formulaic. And he would put out 3 a year, because if you're only writing 60,000 words, so they're kind of they were pulp. They were never in hardback. They were always paperback. Paperback was the Kindle of its day. So the kind of traditions are still there for people who are writing ebooks now. Sorry, I don't know quite why I was saying that, but
I just think it's interesting how there's perceived wisdom as well of what you should and shouldn't do, and I think that's always rubbish, because basically write what you love, and maybe you'll be lucky. Like you with the fantasy book, you wrote what you loved, and maybe that didn't work out, but it could just as easily have been huge, and you've been a massive success, and you just can't tell until you've done it.
No, I mean, I wasn't sure if Robin Hood was going to work, but that did.
Well, that's it. So you just hope, didn't you?
Yeah.
Interesting comment. Sorry, interesting comment here that came in from Giles, who obviously wasn't content just to have one conversation with me, so he's come in for this one as well. But he said they wanted me to use a different name for this thriller, but he said I was dead against it. Spend years building a name and then release a book under a different name. It's hard enough to get your current actual readers to go out and buy your book. And then he probably says, cut off.
No, I think that was a mistake that I made, and I won't make it again if I ever do a Western, or if I do a, I'm sticking with Angus Donald as the brand, and hoping that my readers will stick with me.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. I mean, it sounds, yeah, definitely. I'm going to push for that as well. If I do, jump genres to some extent. One thing I take umbrage with actually is that everyone always says Western is a different genre, and I think, well, it's still historical fiction. I don't understand why if you write historical fiction set in 1940, it's historical fiction, but if you write it in 1880 in Montana, it's suddenly a different genre. It's just historical fiction.
Yeah. But I was remembering A Time of Swords. If you don't.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me suggesting this, but the plot had
you don't need to worry.
With a certain very famous Western movie.
Well,
I thought it worked brilliantly. I thought it worked. Magnificent Seven, I think. Was that deliberate?
I would prefer to say that I'm a massive fan of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, which of course is swords, and it comes from before the Magnificent Seven. But yes, I'm a massive fan of Westerns and samurai movies, and it's mentioned in the afterword, or my note at the end of the book. I do actually say that it was a big inspiration, so I couldn't hide it. It was too obvious, the link.
No, I thought that was really clever, because it gave the book such an excellent structure, and you knew that this character was going to come up, and it's interesting. They were obviously slightly different very different from the from the Magnificent Seven, but it worked really well. And I was thinking, oh, that's a really good idea. I should do that.
Well, if if anyone who's read A Night of Flames will see that I'm continuing that theme, and there's well, not it's so not the whole storyline, but there's definitely elements of that storyline which again have been inspired by another very seminal piece of cinema and literature as well.
Or do you not want to say?
Well, I could say it's. I've mentioned it, so why not? So, Heart of Darkness, Apocalypse Now. So
perfect, yeah.
So Hunlaf goes to Norway and then ends up traveling up a river in search of a madman who's killing everybody. Basically.
Oh, brilliant! Oh, that's a brilliant idea. That is really good. Yeah. So, I'm inspired by that.
The best part of it was that as inspiration, I could buy the Redux version of Apocalypse Now and spend 4 hours immersed in the madness that was Francis Ford Coppola's brain, and watching all of the extras and just going, wow, this is just an amazing movie. I'd forgotten how amazing it was.
It's a great movie, isn't it? I should do a remake of Zulu or something like that. Actually, I probably have done one of those.
Well, we probably do it all the time. Yes. I just wear these things on my sleeve a bit too much, maybe. But so another question here. What's this? There's a mention here about the Louis L'Amour. David Gemmell had a quote about how he wanted to be the fantasy version of Louis L'Amour.
Very good.
There you go.
Very good.
Yeah, I know. I'd heard that David Gemmell was a massive inspiration for me, and I heard that Louis L'Amour was one of his favourites. Yeah, he died quite a few years ago now.
Yeah. I think he wasn't. He was 40 or 50, not.
Yeah, he wasn't. He wasn't very old. There's another question here from someone for you, I think. Angus, I've not read the Robin Hood series. Before I sidelined from the Saxon Viking era, are they written like the Bjarki series, as they're as gripping as Matthew's work? Oh, okay.
Yes. Well, I only have really one style, so. Yeah, the Robin Hood books are. Robin Hood is not the hero. That's the sort of strange thing about it. He's actually kind of a morally grey character. He's a gangsterish figure, and the hero is Alan Dale, who's a young thief who gets caught up with Robin Hood's gang. And at first, Alan thinks that Robin Hood is going to be this terrific hero, but it turns out that he's actually greedy and amoral and vicious, and there is an arc of redemption for Robin Hood over the course of the first eight books, and he does come round to being the Robin Hood that we know. But initially, he's quite a dark, gangsterish figure, and Alan Dale is the good guy who's constantly disappointed by Robin's acquisitive nature, and he robs people and keeps the money. So there's no giving to the poor. He's very good at taking from the rich, but it's the giving to the poor bit that he's not quite so good at. But they're I think they're good. They're full of emotion. They've done very well. They've sold 500,000 copies or something. They did very well. And there's a lot of battles, so it is very much like Bjarki and Tor, with a pair of heroes interacting with each other, sometimes falling out, sometimes getting on, and having adventures. It's based in real history. That was the fun bit for me, was taking Robin Hood and putting him in real historical situations. So he goes on the Third Crusade. There's a whole series around Magna Carta and the Barons' Rebellion, and that kind of thing. So he kind of stops being an outlaw after book one, really, and just becomes another nobleman in England in the late 12th and early 13th century.
That's interesting. I've read the first one, and I think I've read Warlord as well, which is somewhere in the middle of the series, isn't it? So both great, really good. So and yeah, you're right. There's a different flavour between the two.
Yeah, and Bjarki and Tor, I think, are better. Someone asked me this the other day, and said, which do you like more? And it's difficult because all your books are your children. Yeah. But I was working on having a double act. I always admired Patrick O'Brian.
I was going to say,
for pulling off that Master and Commander thing, where you've got these two very different heroes who interact with each other, and that's the joy of the book, is the friendship between them. And I love that, and I thought I wanted to do that with Robin and Alan, and I was sort of fumbling around towards the end, and I got it right towards the end. And Bjarki and Tor is much more their brother and sister. So, spoiler, if you haven't read the first book, that's one of the reveals, but it turns out they're brother and sister, and their relationship is really interesting, and I enjoy their interplay because they're so completely different.
That's really, really interesting, because I've been thinking along those lines as well. And I think Wolf of Wessex is my only standalone that I've written so far. Yeah. That, again, is the interplay between two characters, and I wrote it two points of view.
One, isn't it? Right?
Sorry?
No? Is it an old man and a younger one? Or?
It's an old man and a young girl.
Oh, right, yeah.
So they're very different characters, but again, it's this double-heading story. So you've got the one chapter from Dunstan's perspective, and then one chapter from the girl's perspective, and they just and they go through the whole story. But you've got this interplay of the very different sort of outlooks on life. And I love Patrick O'Brian, and I was thinking along those lines. I haven't even started really. The Western is kind of only a glimmer in my eye, But I'm already beginning to think, can I create two very different characters, to drive the story through. In the Watson, Sherlock Holmes, Patrick O'Brian, the Maturin, Aubrey.
Fun, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, Watson and Holmes. I had a publisher in, I think it was in Norway, who didn't want to publish Bjarki and Tor, and they said, I can't work out who's the hero. Which one is the hero? Is it Bjarki or is it Tor? And I was thinking, you're completely missing the point, you moron.
Absolutely. Yeah,
didn't buy the series.
Yeah,
it's about both of them.
Yeah, I mean, why does it need to be one? It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's very interesting. So we're almost out of time. So if anybody's got any more questions and they want to ping them up, then do so now. But I think we're going to finish chatting in a couple of minutes, because we've been talking for nearly an hour.
Yeah.
But it's been great. Time's gone flying by. There's been some good questions, but we'll wait for a couple of minutes to see if anyone asks there's any questions. Get them in now if you've got any.
I don't know. Thank you very much, Matthew, for arranging all this, because it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, that's all right.
What a good idea. Books and Booze.
Books and Booze. We're definitely going to have to. That's the new name. I've decided now. That's it. The new name. The talking history was so boring. Books and Booze. This is it. This is going to become a podcast, I think.
So cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Let's drink to that. And there's another quote, another question. Another question come through. Wolf of Wessex, definitely a standalone. Oh, that's for me. A question for me. No chance of a follow-up for Wolf of Wessex. Well, never say never. That would be crazy, wouldn't it? But at the moment, it's a standalone. Angus will tell you, it's very difficult to keep all of these different ideas in your head.
Yeah.
And also, I find, and I think, how do you feel about this? Because I'm now on book 9 of the Bear Brand series, and book 2 of the Hunlaf series, the Night, Time for Swords, and they're quite similar. Those two series in that they're swords and Vikings, Saxons. It's all sort of reasonably similar. And it's difficult after a while. You sort of feel like you're difficult to break out of, and even Wolf of Wessex, again, it's Anglo-Saxons and Vikings and stuff. So it's kind of, at some point you need to do something as a palate cleanser and write something that's different and kind of move away from it.
Palate cleanser. I mean, I'm hoping that with the Mongols are different. I mean, that's a completely different culture from the sort of Viking Saxon thing that I've got going in the Berserker books. So I'm hoping that it'll be they say a change is as good as a rest. It'll be better to go and flip between the two much more easily. But the funny thing about series is once they get going, I mean the Robin Hood books were 8, and then I wrote another 2 which I self-published, and I still get people saying, "Can we have some more?"
Yeah,
and I sort of think, "Oh Christ, yeah, I could do," but it's about your own enthusiasm, because if you're not enthusiastic about your subject matter, and after 10 I need definitely a break, but
that's it. I mean, I feel the same way with the Bear Brand books. Obviously, I love Bear Brand's character and the series, and I've got probably 2 or 3 more that I need to tell to finish the whole saga. But it becomes difficult to sort of to keep driving forward, because, like you're saying before, it's a lot of time sitting on your own in front of a keyboard and a computer screen and just typing away. And there's only so many ways of telling the story of those characters, and I try and you try and mix it up and try and do different things and bring new conflicts and new challenges to the characters to make it interesting. In Bear Brand's case, I mean, he's growing as well, so he started off as almost like a child, really. I mean, like a young man, right through to now he's going to be a granddad, by this point.
Oh, really?
He's in his late 30s. But he's finding out that he well, you haven't read all the books, but he spoiler alert. So anyone who doesn't want to hear, but anyway, he's found out he's got a daughter in like book 6, and she's now grown up and she's having a child. So he's only in his late 30s, but he's becoming a granddad. So.
As I'm sure people often did in those days. Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, he got the girl pregnant when he was like 16, and now he's 38 or something, and his daughter's whatever age she is, and everything. So life goes on. So he's now feeling like an old man. He's thinking, oh God, I'm past it. And his son's like grown up. He's got a son who's like 19 or 20, and his son hates him and just says, you fuck off, old man. Don't want to know anything about it. And his son sort of sided with his enemies. So he's kind of in this sort of situation where his life is pretty grim.
One of the things that's quite difficult, I find, is that my heroes get wounded quite a lot in battle. I mean, it's difficult for them to have a full pitch battle and not to end up with at least some kind of wound. And after 9 books or 10 books or whatever, they must be absolutely chronic. It's very difficult not to have an arm missing or something, because they've got to heal really quickly for the next adventure, and that's one of the things that's weird about our business, is that you're constantly having these people fighting. Bear Brand's, I'm sure, been in at least 9 battles.
Oh yeah, he's important, and the rest probably.
And in fact, in medieval times, I was talking to a reenactor the other day. He said, well, of course, he was talking about the way that they painted their shields and with gold and stuff. And I said, well, how extraordinary. I mean, it isn't going to get battered around in battle. And the guy said, yeah, but one of these knights would probably only fight 1 or 2 battles in his whole life. So he really wanted to look his best. And I was thinking, well, I could never get away with that, only having 1 or 2 battles in a series of books, unless you only ever wrote 1 book.
Well, it's interesting that I had a few negative reviews of Wolf of Wessex, because the main character, Dunstan, is supposed to be around, he's probably late 40s, maybe about 50 or odd, but he's an old warrior. He's retired. He's very much like Druss from the David Gemmell legend. So he's off in the forest, living as a hermit. He's a widower. So he's just on his own. His life is just, living on his own, hunting, do a bit of hunting, trapping, a bit of forging knives and stuff. That's it. He doesn't want to know about the world. But throughout the book, when he gets pulled obviously back into the intrigues and battles of the court and stuff, and but as the book goes on, lots of the stuff is him complaining about he's got a bad back and his knee hurts and his shoulder hurts and his elbow hurts and everything hurts because and people, I've had a few people, I'm assuming young people, writing negative reviews saying, "Oh, this old man's just complaining about his aches and pains," and I'm thinking, I'm 51 in a couple of days, and I've not fought any battles, and I have aches and pains and things, my knee hurts or whatever.
Yes.
So if I'd been in, I don't know how many pitched battles against Vikings, and I'd survived, you just would be
stabbed and, multiple times. You'd be an absolute, basket case, wouldn't you? Anyway.
On that note of basket cases, it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure. And Sigurd Allenson is saying that it's been great hearing us talk.
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody else has enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it immensely. So thanks very much, Angus.
Thank you, Matthew. That's been a lot of fun. And I hope we can meet up soon in person. That was really good.
Love that.
Maybe see you sometime in the summer, I hope.
Fingers crossed that in-person events become a thing again. They are slowly becoming a thing. Let's see if that lasts. But cheers to you. And Giles says, see us in real life. Everybody else is saying
see you
nice
soon.
Things.
Okay. All right. Take care, Matthew.
Take care, Angus. And I will end the stream.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks very much for coming, and cheers.